Yes, Madam Chair, thank you so much to this committee for taking the time and for being present, as always, to hear the incredible stories and unfortunate stories of impact of these impact committee members. I'm Paige Duggins-Clay, IDRA's Chief Legal Analyst, testifying in support of House Bill 4625. We thank this committee and Chair Reynolds for their leadership bringing forward this critically important legislation. You know, I did prepare testimony that I've provided y'all. One of the attachments to my testimony is actually a copy, and I apologize, it's black and white. I will follow up to provide the color copy so you can see in vivid detail some of the cyberbullying that the families have been experiencing and some of these really horrific images that we're talking about, which you've heard about a little bit and you'll hear more testimony about in just a moment. I'm going to deviate from my script just a little bit and speak from my heart because it's very emotional for me. It's my privilege to have supported many of these families to coming to testify today, and you've heard their cry that this really has been sort of a tribunal of last resort in many ways to get their stories heard. And many of these families are from Lubbock and the Lubbock area. I cannot emphasize enough that as an advocate who works in this space, I get calls at a minimum on a weekly basis from families all across the state dealing with issues of this nature. And it's racial bullying, bullying on the basis of national origin and immigration status, certainly on gender identity and gender more broadly, sexual harassment. It really is a crisis, and we can, it's very hard for kids and families and educators to come testify during the day, so we couldn't bring them all here. But I will tell you that we're hearing from them and that these kiddos are hurting and their families are hurting and seeking solutions. Chair Dutton, I certainly appreciate your questions about sort of what's the purpose behind this bill. And you've heard some of the stories about where this came from. We actually co-wrote a lot of this language alongside these families. And one of the things that Trinity didn't share is that these educators, you know, to the extent that they are trying to do the right thing, they don't have guidance about what exactly to do when a student comes to them or they witness or observe this really harmful behavior. And Trinity actually wrote herself an affidavit to one of her teachers, said, here's what happened to me, and will you sign this so I can turn it into the principal? I mean, asking a young child to do something like that in order to advocate for herself, it's just unacceptable. I can provide the documentation of that. So I wanted to emphasize that piece. This bill really does create a process for schools to follow. Very common sense. When you get a notification of any kind of bullying, but especially this kind, you document it. You report it to the appropriate authorities and you notify the parents involved and you ask them and have them participate in the investigation. That's the most critical part of this legislation, is really bringing the families in and making sure that we're gathering all the available information and evidence. And finally, this bill collects data on this issue. We do, TEA does currently collect data around bullying generally, but not about this issue, particularly bullying on the basis of a student's identity. There's research that talks about the really horrific mental health and other impacts of this sort that is particularly nefarious and problematic and harmful. And it's critically important for us to gather that information so we can tailor our prevention strategies accordingly. I'm happy to answer any questions about the legislation.
Members, any questions? I had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
The pictures, and some of it's kind of hard to tell. I'll look forward to the pictures, but some of this looks photoshopped. But do you know where they're they edited and added people's faces to different pictures? Do you know where they were were these pictures taken of these children, or were these pictures of these children that they found on social media, or do you know how they got these pictures?
Yes, ma'am. A little bit of both, and one of our families whose children are featured will testify in just a moment about this, but it's a combination. Some of the photos in the Laura Bush Middle School Instagram posts were taken sort of slyly while children were in the bathroom or in the cafeteria, and some were drawn from students' sort of public social media sites. A little bit of both.
I mean, obviously it's horrific, but outside of that, you have pictures of minors taken without their consent and posted on social media without their parents' consent.
Right.
Let alone how awful the posts are. But
right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?